The oldest truism in F1 history is that sometimes there is no smoke in F1 without F1 flame. It is getting more chaotic by the second. I will preface everything I'm about to say with this, though. This is speculation and rumour, but for the avoidance of doubt, all F1 journals are created equally, but some are created more equal than others. This is motorsport.com's Ronald Vording, super close to the Verstappen camp, Raymond Vermeulen, Jos Verstappen to Max Verstappen. He has reported in motorsport.com that it could be chaos, that we could have ourselves movement as far as George Russell to Aston Martin and Maximilian Verstappen then by extension to Mercedes. Don't believe me? Well, here it is. And again, I've got to preface with that. There are caveats with every single one of these. Do these stories necessarily mean that they're going to transpire? Absolutely not. But those of you who don't believe in F1 smoke said that Lewis Hamilton will never go to Scuderia Ferrari. How did that work out for them? Now it's Max Verstappen, it's Russell, it's Alonso. What's behind the story? We're going to read this together because it's techier than techie things. Ronald writes, amid talk about Maximilian Verstappen's future, George Russell's recent media comments and Fernando Alonso's alleged visits to Alpine hospitality, here's what recent developments mean in F1 silly season. It's kicked off. Oh, how we've missed you, driver silly season. It always happens around this time in Formula One. Ronald writes, in theory, this year's F1 silly season should be a relatively quiet one. At the end of this campaign, only Mercedes Racing Bulls have their drivers' contracts expiring, and as always, the second Red Bull and Alpine seats remain big question marks in the short term as far as Franco Colapinto is concerned. Now we know what's going on with Franco Colapinto. He was a stopgap, a financial resource placeholder. He came with the Mercado Libre money. But Fabio Briatore realises if indeed he's to do what he was brought in to do, which is bring the asset value up of Alpine to 1.4, 1.5 billion, let's say, he will need a driver that's capable of delivering points, not yeeting it into the barrier at each and every single turn, as has done the Argentine. Franco Colapinto's was promised, that was his lot, but he hasn't delivered on it. He looked brilliant in his first couple of races, but so did Nick de Vries. What does that mean? F1 is a story where what have you done for me lately is all that counts, is it not? And Franco, not a lot. That's why we'll talk about this in a couple of minutes. That's why you keep seeing Fernando Plan Alonso rocking up at the Enstone team hospitality, having conversations with his manager and former F1 boss, Renault, back in the day, 2005, 2006. Of course, that's going to happen. Ronald continues, in theory, this year's F1 silly season, we read that already. We don't need that again. Come on, Cameron, sort out your marbles. Verstappen's future is still a major talking point. Of course it is. Of course it is. Look, my memory is bad, but as far as F1 things, it's on point. Max Verstappen, you will recall, has told you on a gazillion occasions that he needs a bloody car, a semblance of harmony, and he needs the people, the god tier personnel capable of building a car. Wheatley gone, Fallows gone, Rob Marshall gone, Adrian Newey gone. Where are they then? Of course, Maximilian Verstappen's going to be looking at pastures, isn't he? Especially when it's Adrian Newey over there, when it's Honda as an engine manufacturer over there, when it's Lawrence Stroll, and he has a blank check for you as well. Ronald continues, still, as far as Maximilian Verstappen's future, in the world of Formula One, things are rarely as straightforward as they appear on paper. Contracts aren't definitive, and behind the scenes, everybody talks to everybody, especially within a regulation change, adding uncertainty. As was the case last year, Verstappen's future remains one of the hotly debated topics in the paddock. Toto admitted last year that conversations with Verstappen had taken place, but told the Dutch media in Zandvoort the consensus has been reached over the summer break that a switch for 2025 was not feasible for 2025. How about 2026, Toto? Don't think for a second that Toto, the boy who cried wolf, wouldn't drop kick in the chest a George Russell or an Antonelli if it meant getting a whiff at the signature of Maximilian Verstappen, amending for previous ills, for him having dropped the ball in 2015 and not signed the next generational one. Then they had conversations at Miami over the summer break, but it didn't work out then. You think Toto, the boy who cried wolf, isn't a dog with a bone as far as this Max Verstappen stuff? You think he doesn't want to still get? Of course he does. And it appears like it might be making way, like the sea might be parting for the Max Verstappen opportunity to the boys and girls from Brackley and Brixworth. 1 year on, continues Ronald, Verstappen has repeatedly stated it is his intention, to stay at Red Bull. His contract runs through 2028, but includes clauses, performance ones, as Helmut Marko has confirmed. One of those clauses is tied to Max Verstappen's standing in a Drivers' Championship at specific moments in the season, the summer break being one of them. Drivers always have performance clauses in their contracts, and there are points in the year that tend to be around the summertime when things materialise. Christian Horner replied in Montreal, confirming this then. Max Verstappen could be on the move, ladies and gentlemen, and George Russell is a key linchpin in this, according to Ronald. He continues, more importantly, contracts and clauses are not the be-all and end-all. Horner has previously admitted that he wouldn't want to keep somebody based on just a piece of paper if they'd rather be elsewhere. What is he talking to, Christian? Are you having this conversation under the umbrella heading of Maximilian Verstappen as a going concern at the Bulls that are red? Oh, the humanity. Ronald continues, for us, said Christian Horner, it's about how can we improve, how can we be better, rather than referring to a piece of paper. I always think in life, if you've got to refer to a contract, you've got a problem. It's about a relationship with a driver and about their trust in each other. Yeah, but Christian Horner, you've eroded that trust. Allegation gate, PA gate, not having a car, understeering the RB21. You've eroded that. Adrian Newey, you had, as near as makes no difference, a guarantee for success in Formula One. But at the altar of your misconduct, you allowed him to walk out the door. And tell me that F1 isn't a story told in tense, where you win and lose as a function of your ability to get and keep for as long as possible the goatiest minds in it. Russell's interesting media comments in Montreal. Now, we went through this already, but under the context of this document, Ronald Vording of Motorsports article, I think this is worthy of note. Different, now more material in terms of its consequence. Russell's comments during the Canadian Grand Prix weekend are also notable, writes Ronald Vording. Asked for an update on his Mercedes contract negotiations, he replied, quote, no real conversations, to be honest, because we've got bigger fish to fry at the moment, which is making our car go faster. I know I'm going to be in Formula One next year. My intention and goal are to stay with Mercedes, and I think that's very much the intention of Toto as well. Well, Toto's intention was to keep Lewis Hamilton, but he gave him a 1+1, which practically forced his hand to go elsewhere. He didn't want that, did Lewis? So what are we talking about here? Toto, the boy who cried wolf, his intention often don't match up with his actions. You only need to go and read Ross Brawn's book around the way that he conducted his behaviour when he was buying into Mercedes many moons ago. Techie, I told you we were going to get techie. There's something here also that I want to pull out. No real conversations. What? So George Russell's one of the best to do it in 2025. A young, hungry lion. The dude that you say is going to bring back the boys and girls from Brackley and Brixworth Mercedes back to the mountaintop. That he has everything in him as far as leadership skills. Pace in absolute terms. One of the quickest on the grid as at June 2025. And you're going to let his contract go to waste. You mean to tell me he doesn't have a contract with Mercedes for 2026? Way to tell me that I'm not wanted then, Toto. Way to message that you are in for Max Verstappen. Why else would you allow that dude's contract to run so low in terms of its tenure? It does not make sense. Lewis Hamilton settings. Ronald continues, more interestingly added, it's understandable, you know, the likes of Max Verstappen have always been on the radar, because why wouldn't he be on the radar? He's one of the GOATs, and I get that. Oh, the humanity. This is George Russell saying this, that he knows why Toto would kick him in the chest to get a whiff of the signature of Maximilian Verstappen. He's just that damn good. And in F1, a piranha's tank of a sports endeavour, you go always for the best. Toto's desperate to get his hands on one Maximilian Verstappen, is he not? And George Russell knows this. The fact, continues Ronald, that Russell mentioned Max Verstappen without being asked about the reigning world champion is noteworthy. Touche. Sir, no kidding. Sherlock, material of consequence, he continues. But then it's down to you to prove your worth, says George. And I feel I've done that time and time again over the course of the 7 years in F1 and my whole career. So I've got no concerns. Here's why I don't think George Russell has concerns. Because Aston Martin are logically, according to Ronald Vording, interested, considering signing one George Russell. Now, we know previously we had conversations about a $1 billion contract to Max Verstappen. Don't think this overtypes that. Just like Toto, they would drop kick in the chest of Fernando Alonso, maybe to a launch straw if it means getting a hold of Max Verstappen. But failing that, let's say Max goes to Mercedes, being split turbo hybrid settings in 2014, who better to pull together a power unit on the back of the brand new rules and regs in 2026 than Mercedes, the boys and girls from Brackley and Brixworth. However, failing that, maybe Aston Martin go for George Russell, says Ronald Vording. Dude, one of the GoTS journos, F1 journos to ever F1 journo, and dude intricately more to the Maximilian Verstappen circumstance than you or I. With that in mind, continues Ronald, motorsport.com can reveal that Aston Martin is considering Russell for the new cycle of regulations. It fits perfectly into this. It's a logical consequence of the situation. I'm telling you, you want to consider it then. Maybe this isn't the breaking news scoop that I thought it might be, but I feel like Ronald Vording is trying to tell us something intricately more connected with the Max Verstappen circumstance. I think this is noteworthy. With Verstappen on the radar, Russell needs to keep his options open as well, just in case. The Brit has made clear that he intends to stay with Mercedes and expects to, but his comment, "I know I'll be in F1 next year," unquote, implies that he has backup plans if things take an unexpected turn. That's why you see George Russell having conversations with Fabio Briatore. Of course, that's why Ollie Oakes too. He's considering his options in real time. He's a killer. He would be daft not to. Vording continues, that's no surprise considering Russell has been performing so well, potentially the driver of the season thus far, alongside a Max, alongside an OJ Piastri. The chance of him being left out of the picture is virtually zero, but creating options for yourself is always a wise thing to do in the paddock. And then again, sometimes you've got to put on your F1 investigative cap now and connect the dots for yourself. And then you know that Fernando Alonso is looking to reunite with the one that they call Fabio Briatore at Alpine, of course, because there will definitely be a seat in 2026 unless Franco Colapinto does something about that soon, forthwith. Still, continues Ronald, it's interesting that Aston Martin is brought into the conversation. Fernando Alonso has a contract and Lawrence Stroll's investments even are largely aimed at achieving F1 success with his son Lance, who therefore has a seat for as long as he wants it. By the way, though, to that point, Lawrence Stroll has always had a rolling contract. Lance Stroll doesn't have a rolling contract anymore. Just a wrinkle. Maybe that's noteworthy as well as we delve deep, wade very speculatively into these F1 waters of conjecture. During, continues Ronald Vording, the Canadian Grand Prix, wild rumours circulated about Alonso having been spotted multiple times in the hospitality of Alpine, the Enstone-based team he's raced for at 3 different stages of career. It's worth noting that Briatore is not only Alpine's new advisor, but also still Alonso's manager and a team principal of sorts. To that, Aston Martin team boss Andy Cowell wasn't phased, and he said, quote, "I'm happy for Fernando to wander into any garage. He knows lots of people up and down the pit lane." No, sold it. He says he's also happy with the fact that Alonso's still contracted. Yeah, but but as far as Alonso's concerned, if past his prologue, that's not worth anything, is it? Let's be honest. Fernando Alonso will leave that team in a second if he has a whiff of extending his very declarated career and obtaining another contract with his old mate Fabio. Techier than techie things. Listen, Does George Russell end up necessarily at Aston Martin? Potentially not. Does he stay at Mercedes? Well, Toto's told us that these things will be bottomed out in the next couple of weeks. The summer break is soon. Max Verstappen has himself a decision to make. Does he stay at Red Bull? Does he keep plodding up that Christian Horner design philosophy? Sans an Adrian Newey, sans a Dan Fallows, without now Rob Marshall and without now Jonathan Wheatley. Does he have enough trust in the team and its direction, its trajectory going forward to see out his contract to 2028? Conversely, if the answer to that question is yes, and Max Verstappen has the trust sufficient to stay at that team, then we don't have ourselves a conversation. If he leaves, however, the favourites to gain his signature will be Toto Wolff and Mercedes. Lest we forget the last big rule and regulation change. Who nailed it best? They had a name, and their name were Mercedes. Toto, the boy who cried wolf, Andy Cowell, and that split turbo hybrid settings. Mercedes winning 8 constructors back to back to back, as near as makes no difference, on the back of a durable competitive advantage that they wielded up and down the grid as far as its power unit. 30 to 40 brake horsepower, some said. Now, if that happens, if Max goes to Mercedes, then there's only one place. Again, if George Russell is the killer that we all know him to be, where he's going to maximise, no, optimise for his chances of winning a championship of the drivers' variety. That team has a name. That team is Aston Martin.